Kick and chase by Mullen. Kick and chase again by Mullen. This will be a miracle. Oh, it is a miracle. Coming out to give it to Martin, who gets very early in the tackle. David Golf-Baluma. He fell from the sky and cracked down to plant it down in one of the most acrobatic tries we've ever seen.
If you'd like to sponsor the Hot Tub Time Machine Rugby League podcast, you can do so by contacting us at the 81st Minute at outlook.com. And welcome to a brand new podcast via the 81st Minute family. It is the Hot Tub Rugby League Time Machine, and I'll be your host, Curtis Woodward. It is episode 1, and episode 1 we're going to talk tonight about the 2002 Sydney Roosters season, and who better to get on than a tragic Rooster who just so happens to be a good mate and also part of the 81st Minute Steel Sports commentary team, Mr. Cam Hickson. Hello, mate. How are you, old buddy?
Oh, I'm very well, thank you, Curtis, and thank you for having me on the podcast. I can't wait to be part of the Rugby League Hot Tub Time Machine, Rugby League Time Machine,
you got it right.
However you want to say it.
You got it right. So just to put this in perspective as well, so obviously you may be listening to this tomorrow at whatever time of the day or in future days. We are recording on a Wednesday night. So Cam, I'm going to ask you, mate, have you got a drink in hand?
I don't have a drink in hand, unfortunately, Curtis. I'm on early morning shifts, so I'm starting at 5 a.m. in the morning, so it's just about bedtime for me.
All right, so let's get stuck into this. And I guess a lot goes into a season, Cam, and I want to just quickly talk about or go back to the year 1994. I know we're talking about 2002, but 1994, Nick Politis, he grabs a bloke by Phil Gus Gould, and he drags him across to the Sydney Football Stadium from the Panthers, who at the time, around that era, had some dramas of their own. They'd obviously won a premiership, and then things went sour after that with the unfortunate passing of Ben Alexander, and it was just a little bit too hard for the Panthers to get back on the horse, so to speak. So Gus comes across in 94. The Roosters still struggle. They miss the finals in the next couple of years. But then Gus gets Freddie Fittler to the club in 1996. The first time they make the final since 87, that's in 96. How important, way before 2002, how important was Nick Politis getting Phil Gould and Brad Fittler as a combination to Bondi?
Well, most people will know, Curtis, if they follow the rugby league closely, that especially during the late 80s and early 90s, apart from those couple of years when the Sydney Football Stadium was being built and the Roosters were playing out of Henson Park, they had a gentleman called Hugh McGahn running the show pretty much for the Roosters at that stage. Apart from those couple of seasons, the Roosters were seen as the transit lounge. It was a place to go, get some money, play a season or two, get some really good money off the back of Nick Politis, and then either end your career or head over to England. So getting someone like Gus across to the club was pivotal in changing basically the mindset of the players coming to the Roosters at that time, because they were coming across looking for the easy money. Blokes like Paddy Vorton, for example, finished his career at the Roosters. Got a nice fat paycheck for a couple of seasons, did what he had to do, ran around for a couple of seasons and then called it quits. So getting Gus across was the first step in basically changing the club's mindset from accepting mediocrity into not accepting it and only accepting excellence. And on the back of Gus, he then attracted players. Once he got Freddie across, other players came across with him. And it's pretty safe to say from around about the 1998 mark onwards, the Roosters have been a powerhouse of rugby league.
And Phil Gould, of course, stands down as head coach at the end of 1999. He doesn't leave the club, whether it's an official capacity or unofficial. He's never really left the Roosters. But Graham Murray takes over the job from Gould. And when I say take over the job, he took the head coaching role but Gould had his fingers, I guess, you can argue against this if you like, but Phil Gould had plenty to do with the Roosters moving forward, even though he'd stood down as head coach. The Roosters make the grand final in 2000 against the Broncos. If you look back on that grand final, I mean, I feel sorry for anyone that had to play the Broncos that year in the grand final. The Broncos win it easily. Unfortunately, in 2001, Graham Murray doesn't do so well, and this is the start of, I guess, this brutal mentality from club officials right across the league. Where, look, if you don't earn your paycheck and you don't meet the KPIs, you're out on the road, you're out in the street. Ricky Stewart, named head coach in 2002, he had some good success as a lower grade coach at the Canterbury Bulldogs, I believe in Jersey Flegg, and he finds himself on the doorstep of a Roosters dynasty. And I know they only won one grand final between 02 and 04, but did Ricky Stewart understand what he had leading into this role? And I'm sure it will be very similar to what Nathan Brown at the Warriors is getting into next year under Phil Gould as well.
Well, Curtis, the thing was that, as you say, Gus had his fingers in every pie. He was pulling the strings. There's no questions about that. He was somewhat blamed, whether rightly or wrongly, I believe rightly, for the demise of Graham Murray.
I'd agree with that as well.
Yeah, he was there pulling the strings, whispering in Nick Politis' ear as to which direction the club needed to go. He brought them success, as you said, in 2000. He got them to the dance against a mighty red-hot Broncos team. The following year, they got knocked out 1 week before the semi-finals on the back of a Joey Johns, an absolute blinder.
Yeah,
again
that was the prelim final, right, Cam? It's not like they missed the 8, did they?
No. It was that they went to the second last game of the season, and it was only Joey Johns that pulled out one of the best Joey Johns performances of all time. Hence, Newcastle went into that grand final as raging red-hot favourites and got tipped over.
It's incredible, isn't it?
So as I said, now, coming to 2002, and what a tumultuous season it was, you had South Sydney finally getting a court order to get back into the competition in 2002. So they'd been out for a few years. So the arch rivals were gone missing in action. They were nowhere to be seen. David Gallop takes over the Rugby League. So he comes in and takes charge in 2002. So there was lots and lots of changes happening in that 2002 season. And look, to be honest with you, Curtis, I think you or I or any of the listeners out there could have taken over the head coach role of the Roosters in 2002 and probably won the premiership with them. They were that good a team in 2002.
And I think what puts this in perspective way before anyone else did it, I mean, and you talk about coaches for everything. The Roosters around this time, they had stuff like that. I think at one point they hired Bill Harrigan as a referees coach. They had everything going for them.
John Cartwright was sitting in the assistant's chair as the defensive coach with the new up and in, everybody rush in, let's have 6 guys in a tackle defence that had never been seen before.
Yeah, we'll get to that shortly too, because that was a brutal defensive line and tactics from the Roosters, particularly from 2002 onwards. But at the same period, they also bring down a guy from the Broncos by the name of Justin Hodges. Now, before Greg Inglis and before all that, Justin Hodges was the prodigy, and the Roosters got him. That caused a stir at the time too, didn't it?
Yeah, it certainly did, because they'd gone through previous problems where they tried to get a couple of really good players. Eventually, in the draft, they drafted Terry Hill in the very first ever draft, and he didn't really want to play at the club. And so they'd always been on the lookout for that younger superstar that was going to be a superstar of the game. They've got the older superstar in Fittler. They just needed a couple to go around him just to fit in and have that mix of youth and experience. And yeah, it was a real coup being able to get what was seen to be one of the next big superstars, the next Chris Close, if you will, in Justin Hodges.
Can you hear that? Can you hear that through the mic? Can you hear the thunder coming through? You can't hear that?
No, I couldn't hear it, mate.
No, it scared the shit out of me. I'm cowering in the corner.
But a nice thunderstorm going on down there.
Yeah, it'll be up your way shortly, mate. So I was going to talk about it later, but we might as well talk about it now. And the defensive line and the defensive tactics of the Roosters. Now, obviously, in this period, there were a lot of great attacking teams through the Newcastle Knights, Andrew Johns, and the Broncos, and the great Parramatta team of 2001 under Brian Smith, who were just electric, if you want to use a term that Parramatta fans would like. But
one other team you got to throw in there in the 2002 season that you can't forget about, Curtis, is the Canterbury Bulldogs.
Yeah, well, we'll get to them in a second. But talking about Adrian Morley for a second. Now, he came to the Roosters in 2000. Now, I reckon it took him about 12 months to find his feet, like truly find his feet in the NRL. And as we know now, he's one of the best forwards to ever play the game, one of the greatest Englishmen to ever come and play in Australia.
I've got a bit of a theory about the British players, Curtis. I think it takes them 2 off-seasons, 2 full, serious, injury-free off-seasons to hit their absolute most here in the NRL. It just takes them that little bit of time in that first off-season to acclimatise, the first season of picking up the speed and the intensity, and then when they get that second off-season under their belt, they're really ready to rip and tear, and I think it was more like that for Morley.
And I guess the Roosters... Look, I'll put it this way. I think the Roosters could have still won the 2002 Premiership without Adrian Morley, but with as you just mentioned, John Cartwright and the way they played defensively and just destroyed teams, like just murdered teams. How much say did Morley have in that team? He was, and I know for a fact because I spoke to David Shillington on another podcast we do called Top of the Props. He spoke about Morley and said Morley didn't say much before games. But on the field, when his eyes started to blink and his eyes started to roll, other teams just shit themselves. And
well, yeah,
he was the enforcer. He was a freak.
And don't forget, back then, shoulder charges were legal. And tackling with your shoulder out in front of your head, maybe the younger listeners or the more recent listeners, Dylan Napa style, so to speak, was quite legal.
And Morley too, though, not just shoulder charges, but he had such a technique on him. And he would hit. He could hit with his chest, his shoulders, his arms, and his head all in one. And he was just a phenomenal player. And I think, as I said, the Roosters could have still won 2002, but it would have been so much harder defensively for what they were trying to achieve if they didn't have Adrian Morley.
Oh, it makes a massive difference. But they also had another hard man up front that they'd gotten from Parramatta, I think in the 2001 season, that they got across that made a massive difference to them in the man called Jason Kalis.
Yeah.
Massive recruit for them to go alongside Morley and just give them that absolute steel up front that the teams needed in that era.
All right, so let's get stuck into the actual season proper. So, as you just mentioned, the Bunnies, your arch enemies, all the talk in off-season leading into pre-season is about South Sydney. And I think from memory, they got a major sponsor in TV Week, which looked awesome on their jerseys. I think George Piggins done a really good job at getting everyone across for a can of Coke and a meat pie. But Adam Muir leads the Rabbitohs out. Round 1, 2002. There's 40,000 fans at the SFS. And everyone thinks the Rabbitohs are back. And here they come. And the Roosters destroy him. It's 26-0 at halftime. Full-time 40-6. Brett Mullins starts at fullback. Get him across from Canberra. Mullins, a famous name for Roosters fans, as you know, Cam. And Paul Green, unfortunately, does his knee. He's out for the year. That's the last game he ever plays for the Roosters. And he had a pretty good year for the Roosters in 2001. Before I go into the next couple of weeks, just that first night, just to beat the Rabbitohs on that first night back and to do it the way he did. Can you explain for listeners out there that don't understand the rivalry between the Roosters and the Rabbitohs? And Cam, I want the bloke that's in the car on the way home from Belmore and all these games we've called and we're in the car with Keith Robert Payne and you've told us about Anzac Parade and how the Rabbitohs changed all the rules. What was it like to hammer him and where were you that night? Because I'm sure you can probably remember it.
Oh, I can tell you exactly where I was. I was in the members' stand of Aussie Stadium.
Ah, beautiful. Aussie Stadium as well, as it was called at the time.
It was Aussie Stadium back then, and I can tell you it was a Rabbitohs home game. They afforded the Rabbitohs the luxury of having the opening game of the season, of the very first, I believe it was a Friday night from memory.
Yep.
I'd have to go back and check.
No, it was. It was the opening night of the year.
Yeah, and I think it was a Friday night, and anyhow, as you say, it was packed. You couldn't move in the joint. It was absolutely wonderful. But look, to be honest, the Roosters fans that were going in there were expecting blood. They got blood. I mean, you had to feel a little bit sorry for the South Sydney team. They had I think it was about 4 months to get together a team.
Mm.
They had no time, they had no money, they had no players to draw from. It wasn't like they had a full off-season to go and recruit. They had a coach by the name of Craig Coleman. That couldn't have helped anybody.
That's nice to say.
They really had their backs. Well, look, if people want to delve into the history of Craig Coleman, go for it. It's littered and tainted with things that shouldn't be around a rugby league club, but that's for another time and another podcast. But yeah, the Roosters supporters were going there expecting blood, and they got it. The Roosters didn't let them down, and unfortunately, it was a pretty ordinary season for South. I think they won 4 or 5 games in the entire season of 2002, and some people questioned whether or not they should have actually been allowed back in the comp after all.
Interestingly, though, after that first win, the Roosters lose their next 4 games. They lose to the Warriors, the Broncos, the Northern Eagles, who I think by that time had Brett Kamali, and the Newcastle Knights, who were the defending premiers. So 4 losses on the trot. How much pressure internally would have Ricky Stewart been under? Obviously, there would have been heaps on him from the media outside the club. But a coach in his first year loses 4 on the trot. They're 1-4 after 5 rounds. Paint the picture for Ricky Stewart after 5 rounds.
And they got pumped in a couple of those games too.
Yeah, they did.
There's no escaping it. Like the Newcastle game at Aussie Stadium, I still remember that, going there thinking we were a massive chance. We had pretty much our best team on the park and got absolutely pumped for our trouble. I think it ended up about, I think it was about 20 odd 10 or something in that ballpark vicinity. But yeah, all of a sudden they find themselves sitting on the bottom of the ladder. And, the talk was out is just, have they made a mistake getting rid of Graham Murray for this bloke? He's done nothing, and all of a sudden, we're 1-4 and at the bottom of the ladder. What's going on? There was immense pressure on him. The media were all over him. And a lot of the rival clubs were saying that they'd made a mistake going that way.
The next win comes after that, round 6, against the lowly Cowboys, with all due respect to them at the time. At the SFS, they get up 58-12. Luke Phillips does play fullback, and he will come into our discussion, I guess, a little bit later as well, because I guess we can talk about him now. Let's just do it now. Luke Phillips, he is an unsung hero of that 2002 team. And what sticks out in my mind, Cam, not as a Roosters fan, but just from the 2002 season. I mean, he was at the back end of his career, and his kick returns, he came back like a missile. He was a freak. And if you remember later, Carmichael Hunt would make his name doing the same thing. But and I'll talk about this in the grand final too, about the wingers and some moments in the grand final that came way before the Avalanche in the back end of that game against the Warriors. But Luke Phillips, I mean, is he a guy that ever reached his full potential? Or is 2002 something, obviously he can hang his hat on for the rest of his career, but I mean, when you can talk about Brad Fittlers and Adrian Morleys all you want, but it couldn't have happened without someone like Luke Phillips at the back. And he didn't play a lot of the season. There were a lot of different guys that played fullback. But speak about Luke Phillips for us for a second.
He's just one of those dour, tough fullbacks that play way above his weight. The person that leaps to mind for younger podcast listeners or more recent podcast listeners is a bloke called Brett Hodgson. Most people remember getting ragdolled by Gordon Tallis. That's the sort of player that Phillips was. It didn't matter if you put up a bomb and he was standing underneath it and you had the likes of Gordon
copped
Tallis
a lot of shit, didn't he?
down. You could have Tallis, you could have all those really hard men charging at him. He'd just stand his ground, take the bomb, and then get absolutely smashed, get up, play the ball, and shake it off. He was just unflappable. He was bomb-proof, as some people would say. There was just nothing that he couldn't do. He had all the skills. He might not have been the quickest, the fastest, or the most fleet of foot, or the fanciest of foot, but he was just a solid football player. There was nothing that he wouldn't do or put his body on the line to do to save the Roosters. There was a number of times during that season where he pulled off either try-saving tackles or put his body on the line to bundle people out over the touchline. He just put it all on the line. And he never really reached the heights again after 2002, but as you say, he can hang his hat on that 2002 season because I can guarantee they don't win that comp without him at the back.
I remember, and I haven't met Luke Phillips personally, but I've heard a lot of good stories about him from other people saying he's a good bloke, all that kind of stuff. I remember being a young kid at the older Runner Park before it got knocked down, Manly and Magpies. And Manly were red hot. I think it was 98. So we're talking Manly, hot team. And Manly were warming up at the northern end down near the old wooden grandstands. And he must have had some mates down at the other end screaming out to him. And for 15 minutes while Manly warmed up, he sat on the fence doing the old leg swings. And I'm sure at one point he had a sip of one of his mates' beers. And he went out in the field and he kicked a couple of goals and Manly win by 40. He was just a cool cat. But 2002, I'm sure he'd be very proud of what he did because he got back for the grand final. And we will talk about that because another bloke called Chris Flannery played a couple of games in the finals for the Roosters at fullback. But after that Cowboys win, the Roosters cruise for a while there, and they do it nicely, kind of sit around 5th or 6th for most of the season. But Brad Fittler's retired in 2002 from rep football. Now, everyone talks about Brad Fittler, the loose cat that likes to get his Origin boys out on some turf and scrunch the toes up and all these weird things and yoga and Yoda and whatever else you want to talk about. But Brad Fittler, the football player, there's not a greater mind in the game than Brad Fittler, the football player. How much did it help the Roosters in that middle part of the season where you didn't lose any ground, but having Brad Fittler there and not having to worry about the New South Wales Blues or Anzac Test selection, Brad Fittler was there day to day for the Roosters in that middle part of the season.
Well, that was one of the good things about the 2002 season, Curtis. The Roosters, for all of the hype about them and the potential for them to win the comp, they didn't have that many State of Origin players. You go through their team at around about State of Origin time, which I think was around about the middle rounds, and you're talking about Phillips at the back, you're talking about Mullins.
Well, even the kids, Minicello, Hegarty,
Chris Flannery was in the centres.
Craig Wing, all these guys were just off selection.
Correct. They were good enough to play, but there were better going around at the time than them. But they just combined so well. Really, about the only blokes they lost to State of Origin at that time was Brian Fletcher, Craig Fitzgibbon, and maybe Luke Ricketson, maybe their back row from time to time. All
right, so in very importantly, which you brought up before, you brought up the Canterbury Bulldogs. For the Roosters, August 17, it's round 23. You're down there against the Raiders. You win easily, 38-12. Craig Wing at halfback. The team looks settled. Everything's great. The Roosters are going well. And then on August 24, it's announced that Canterbury Bulldogs have been stripped of 37 competition points. They've cheated the cap. And this is from the Sydney Morning Herald on the 24th of August. The Canterbury Bulldogs were effectively thrown out of this year's NRL competition yesterday when the league stripped them of all competition points and fined them $500,000 for exceptional and deliberate breaches of the salary cap. A clearly emotional NRL CEO, David Gallup, called yesterday a bitter day for rugby league and said the game had its heart broken in an unexpected and tragic way. Now, even then, as a Roosters fan, it would have been great to hear that, like as bad as it sounds for the Bulldogs. I mean, you're an opposition team, and if it happens now, of course, you get a little bit excited if you're in contention for the finals. But that changes everything, right? Like, surely, because the Bulldogs were far and away the best team in the comp in 2002 to that point.
They won 20 games in that season. Can you fathom that? 20 games and
there were still games to play in the season. They were already on 37 points.
Correct.
So for the Roosters, as a club, does that change much for them, or do they just go about their business?
Well, it changed a lot for them because they were, as you were saying, they were starting to struggle. They were going on a run at this time. I think they won their last 6 games in a row, if I'm not mistaken, in the 2002, because I think they went through and won like 10 or 11 games in a row to win the comp. So they were on the start at that particular round. They were 2 games into a winning streak that would take them all the way to the premiership. So it was important because in the end, they ended up running 4th. Now, in the system that they were running in the semi-finals in 2002, you were playing on the old McIntyre system where 1 played 8, 2 played 7, 3, 6, 4, 5. So it was important to finish higher up the ladder because the 2 lowest placed losers went out. So 3 and 4 could technically still go out in that first week of the semi-finals. So it was important to finish as high the ladder as you possibly can. Now, with Canterbury coming out of the competition, it ended up boosting the Roosters up a little bit further, and they ended up the very last round of the year, which I'm sure you'll touch on in a minute, playing the Cronulla Sharks basically for a home final in that following week.
I mean,
so they ended up finishing 4th. But yeah, to have a team that looked like your biggest opposition for the premiership being thrown out of the competition must have been a massive boost for the players, even though disappointing as it is that you wouldn't be playing against some of those blokes. But for the fans especially, you feel cheated as a fan because if this team is systematically rorting the salary cap as was alleged and, ongoing, etc., then they need to be thrown out of the competition. But unfortunately, it didn't really go far enough because they were able to retain the players they had, work the salary cap around a little bit, and win the comp 2 years later with almost the exact same team.
Yeah. The next week after the salary cap announcement, and this is a big one for me, the eventual minor premiers, the Warriors, who were a top 4 team and absolutely killing it. The Roosters come out and beat the Warriors 44-0. That's it. That's a huge win. And even with the Dogs out, the Roosters, they get into the top 4. So the Roosters are in. Ahead of them, going into the finals, the Warriors, the Knights, and the Broncos. Now, to put that in perspective, now you, Cam, at the time might have thought, oh yeah, we're morals, we're going to do this, we've got a great team. To me, looking at this, with hindsight, you've got the Warriors, who you've just beaten 44-0, which is a pretty good flex. You got the Warriors who are on a roll. You got the Newcastle Knights, the defending premiers with Andrew Johns, and you got the Brisbane Broncos, and we'll touch on their team in a minute at 1, 2, 3. So at the time, did you think that you guys were good enough to beat those top 3 teams?
The way we played against the Warriors in that route that you just described, we were good enough to beat anybody, anywhere, at any time. That was almost a flawless display from the Roosters that afternoon. Again, was lucky enough to be out there at Aussie Stadium. I mean, they lost the penalty count. They were hammered in the penalty count, as the Roosters usually are. That tends to be the case. But they just played flawless football. They made hardly any errors from memory, and just absolutely wiped the Warriors off Aussie Stadium. And the Warriors were, at that stage, the team to beat. So with Canterbury out of the competition and the Warriors looking like they were going to be the minor premiers, to come out and beat them 44-0 in the middle of this build-up that the Roosters were doing. And now, I think 4 games, what was that, round 24, so that would have been their 4th win in a row. You knew they were building towards something bigger and better. And you knew that as a fan, and you had that feeling that maybe, is this the year that we're going to finally end this damn 27-year drought? Is this the year we're finally going to get over the line? We were close in 2000, but all of a sudden you could feel it building towards something a little bit more special.
During the season as well, a bloke named Luke Ricketson breaks Kevin Hastings' first grade games record. I guess it wasn't just momentum and amazing roster management and the fact that the team was backed by a huge coaching staff which could do anything for the players at any time. But Luke Ricketson, he's the pin-up boy, right? So even Brad Fittler, who is the leader, he's the poster boy. But then there's Luke Ricketson, who is a local junior. And during the year, he breaks Kevin Hastings, another Roosters Legends, record. Ricketson at 13, how important was he? You know, we've spoken about Morley. You touched on Jason Kalis. We've spoken about Fittler, a little bit about Craig Wing, and some of the outside backs. But the glue, Luke Ricketson.
Well, there was the 2 of them in the back row that were the heart and soul of that team, and that was Craig Fitzgibbon and Luke Ricketson. Every team needs a Luke Ricketson, somebody that's going to get in and make them 30, 40 tackles, He's the absolute workhorse, just puts his head down and his backside up and just works and works and works. He had the ability to be able to hole run. He had the ability to be able to ball play, being a former centre in his early days. But yeah, he was the soul of the team. And as you say, the Roosters are much maligned for not having local juniors. Well, there's one that played over 300 games for them. And most Roosters supporters, if they go back far enough, will say that Horry Hastings was the quintessential Rooster. But those that came through the 90s and the 2000s will say that Luke Ricketson was the Rooster man. He was the glue, as you say, that held them together. He was the heart and soul of that team. Freddie was the brains and, as you say, the poster child. But Ricketson, he did the work. He was in there in the engine room the entire time, making his 40 and 50 tackles a game. He was doing what some of the hookers do these days in making all those tackles and still having to ball play. And with his back row partner, Fitzgibbon, they were the soul of the Roosters in 2002.
And old Rico done it right off the field too in the pubs and clubs around the eastern suburbs as well, didn't he? Oh.
He never missed out, Rico.
So week one of the finals. Let's get into the finals now because I feel like we're going to spend a bit of time in the grand final. So we'll fast forward a little bit. The finals, week one versus the Sharks. Flannery's at fullback, Mullins on the wing, Todd Burns in the centres. But it doesn't matter. There's too much power in class, and you guys win 32-20. So you go through the week two against the defending premiers, and the Knights are without Andrew Johns, and who will go on in a few weeks and win his third Dally M. But this is a point now in week two of the finals. No Andrew Johns. This is one of those games. This is one of those rubber games where you think, oh, okay, we can't trip over here because that's the season gone. That's another 12 months we have to wait. But you go out and you do what you have to do. You hammer him 38-12, and it's just perfect. It's just another one of those nights where everyone does their job. As I mentioned, Flannery at fullback, and just a great overall team performance. Burn 2 tries, Minicello 2 tries, Fitzgibbons
the slowest winger in the world, 2 tries.
Mullins, Chad Robinson get tries, Croker kicks a couple of goals, Fitzgibbon kicks a couple of goals, and that's the thing looking back too. And most of this I'm getting off the great man Andrew Ferguson's Rugby League Project website, and if you haven't seen that, please go and have a look. I mean, again, it's just the points are shared around. It's always a team performance with this Roosters team.
And that was the whole thing about 2002. With Fittler pulling the strings, they could beat you in the middle, they could beat you out wide, they could beat you with kicking game, and they could beat you with speed. And that was the sort of thing that it didn't matter who they went up against. They could tailor game plans to be able to combat the strength of the opposition, and they had the players to be able to pull it off. You have a look at some of the bench players that the Roosters used throughout the season. They had some great bench players, blokes like David Kidwell.
Andrew Lomu.
Andrew Lomu. Blokes that never quite got the credit that they probably deserved for the part that they played in the 2002 season for the Roosters.
So let's go to week 3, though. So you want to talk about a trip in week 2. So week 3, there is some pressure now. So you've beat the Sharks and the Knights without Andrew Johns. In your one clash during the season against the Bulldogs, who Canterbury fans will say, whatever, that they were the best team. You went down to them pretty convincingly. I think it was something like 24-12, 26-12, something like that. You've got the Broncos in the prelim final. The Roosters haven't won a grand final since 1975. And I'll quickly just go through this Broncos 17. Lockyer, Takiri, Tate, DeVere, Chris Walker, Berrigan, Langer, Webke, Walker, that's Shane, Petro Sivanasiva, Tallis, Parker, Carlaw, the bench Myers, G, Lee, and Maguire. That is almost an Australian team. Don't forget
Alfie was 36 at that stage, though, mate.
Yeah, okay, but if you look at that team on paper, most of Australia on that night would be thinking Broncos might get him here.
Well, you basically had a state of origin team, didn't you?
Mm.
You pretty much had the Queensland state of origin team playing in the NRL.
Yeah. And then you look at the game itself, the Broncos, they lead 12-8 at halftime. Now, there's a moment on YouTube which I found earlier tonight. You can go and have a look at it, everyone. If you are listening, you can jump on YouTube and search this yourself. It's the 65th minute. The Roosters are up 16-12, and I believe that is the final score. Lockyer puts a bomb up, and Minicello brings it back, and Maguire hits him with a fair tackle, just buckles him in half. And Justin Hodges, funnily enough, drags Maguire off the tackle, and out of nowhere, Maguire hits him straight in the jaw with one of the best rights you've ever seen. And it drops Hodgson. He's out cold on his knees for a couple of seconds. But what I noticed from that, the Broncos all charged in. Some of the Roosters charged in to stop it. But in the background, there were veterans like Morley casually sauntering across. And what I picked up before that, and everyone talks about the Villasani moment in the grand final, which we'll be talking about in a second. But from that moment on, the Roosters don't lose that game. And the same thing happens in the grand final. I would have hated to be an Andrew G or a Webke or a Sivana Siva who's already played 65 minutes, and then little Casey Maguire comes on the field and throws a punch to fire up the Roosters pack. Because when that happened in this 2002 Roosters team, when something went against one of their players, they went up 500%. They went mad. So,
and that was evident a number of times through the season. There's a number of times you can go back through that season and see where games changed on the back of either a bad decision or, as you say, something happening to one of their small men, where their big men decided, well, we're going to stand up and protect them. And as you say, on this occasion, when Hodges copped that right hand, you could see the boys in the background, Morley, Kalis, Kidwell especially. He wasn't one to be able to hold back. And just Mick Crocker, another one that was able to lose his lose his ability to reason, very, very quickly. Those guys just lift to another level, and as you say, the Broncos really weren't in the game after that at all. They really had no domination, and I think from that time on, I think they only pressured the line once in the rest of the game.
Yeah, something pretty close to that. So you're into the grand final. So even in grand final week, and this may not have been the case for you, Cam, but for outsiders looking in, I mean, now you've got the fairy tale Warriors, and everything's about the Warriors, the minor premiers. They're riding a wave of an entire country of New Zealand, and they've got 95% of Australia going for them in the grand final as well. I mean,
got to hate.
but that's the thing though. Like, we talk about the whole year. And all the news is about other clubs and Canterbury getting docked and not being there, and better teams, and Andrew Johns defending premiers, and the Broncos and the Warriors on this fairy tale. But everything seemed to work in the Roosters' favour the whole way through.
And don't forget, by this stage too, the Roosters were on the back of a 10-game winning streak coming into the grand final. They hadn't lost since, I believe it was round 20. I'm just going to go back and have a quick look at the stats I've got written down. They had a bye in round 20. So it must have been round 19 was their last loss. Yeah, where they got beaten by the Bulldogs in 24-20. That's right, 24-12. They got beaten by the Bulldogs. So they didn't lose a game from round 19 in, playing a 26-round season. And finals. So on the back of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's 6 plus the 3 finals going through.
It's not a bad effort, is it? Yeah.
So 9 games in a row going into a grand final. I can tell you from being around them, and I was lucky enough that year. I was up in the Royal Hotel at Randwick, up near the hospital there at Randwick in the junction of Randwick there. It's a beautiful spot. We were in there having a few quiet beers the night before the grand final. And who do you think wandered into the bar? Cartwright, Stewart, and the Cougar himself, Ronnie Palmer. And was fortunate enough to be able to just sort of, just sidle over, being the Roosters fan that I was, and just, wish them the best of luck and buy them a congratulatory beer, hopefully. And give that to them and wish them the best of luck for the next day. And Ricky had that glint in his eye and sort of just winked. He said, "We'll be right, mate." He said, "I'm pretty confident about this one."
And so he should too, because Luke Phillips, he's back at fullback. He played the week before. Craig Wing from the Rabbitohs, he's across. He plays at halfback. But there's Brad Fittler. He won a title at the Panthers as a kid. But he basically helped build the Roosters on his own shoulders, obviously with the help of Phil Gould. He's the captain. He's the man. It's a fairy tale story for himself if they can get across the line. And it's a long way from Ashcroft, way before that, back when he played for the Stallions in the West Comp, a long time before that. Pre-game entertainment, Billy Idol, we'll leave that where it is.
I love my footy!
But there's a couple of moments in this grand final I want to talk about. Now, obviously, the big moments, we all know about the big moments, but, I mean, stuff like the 23rd minute, and it comes off the back of a Brad Fittler break from his own 30. It's a quick play the ball. Minicello out of dummy half, gets a quick pass away to Fletcher. Todd Byrne goes down the sideline. Hails a pass back into Hegarty. That's first points. That's a huge moment. That's the first points of the game. And it did come off Fittler. But there was a couple of lesser likes there. Byrne and Hegarty, again, as we spoke about before, they do their job. But what I want to talk about, Cam, really quickly, just before half-time, the Roosters on the attack again. And I believe it's the 39th minute. And Justin Murphy, who is a whippet for the Warriors, he takes an intercept. But he's mowed down by Minicello basically within 15, 20 metres. Minicello grabs him. He's on the ground. An amazing effort from Minicello to turn and grab him so quickly. But a few seconds later, Stacey Jones, with one of the best kicks I've ever seen under pressure, with time running out in a grand final on half-time, he kicks about 50 metres for the other side of the field in the corner. And Francis Melly, the other winger, is flying through for the Warriors. And if he gets there a millisecond earlier, he scores. But from nowhere, Luke Phillips gets across to knock the ball dead on half-time. And in those few seconds, the Minicello chase and then Luke Phillips on the other side of the field, those moments win your grand finals just as much as the plays later.
And that's what I was saying about Phillips doing whatever he had to do to put his body on the line for the Roosters in 2002. It was those little try-saving moments, things like that, getting over and holding players up, which he did during the season on a number of occasions, and just the desperation that he showed with no regard to his body at all to keep the Roosters in. And at halftime, when you went in leading 6-2, it was, you got that feeling that, well, if they couldn't crack us in the first half, how are they going to crack us in the second half when the Roosters were seen as the fittest and the fastest team in the NRL that season? How are they going to crack them? That wall, the Bondi Wall, as they were calling it then, and that was the call from the players. As they were running up at every play the ball, it was wall, and they'd all go up together in a line and smash the opposition. You just couldn't see how the Warriors were going to break them.
Well, they did break eventually in the 46th minute, that famous Stacey Jones try. The Warriors are up 8-6, and it goes back into an arm wrestle for the next 10 minutes, and then Fittler kicks the 40-20. But the Fittler 40-20 is amazing. But in the next couple of minutes, Fittler does something else, which is just as important. Now, Craig Wing scores the try, and he's got that great line where he runs like, it's a beautiful line. But he can only run that line because Brad Fittler comes from the other side of the ruck, from the left to the right, and hits Wing on the chest, and then Wing does his stuff. But again, in those few minutes, you don't talk about those moments with Fittler. We talk about the Villasanti moment and all that stuff. But a bit of class from Fittler on the old legs, the 40-20, and then he changes the attack to the other side of the field and sets up Craig Wing. That's the breaker right there. The Roosters go up 12-8.
Well, that was always the great thing about Freddie Fittler. It didn't matter how much toe he lost or how much speed he lost. And the same could be said to the likes of Alan Langer and Darren Lockyer in his later years. It didn't matter how much speed they lost. They could still read a game incredibly well, and they could still see what was in front of them. And that was the time that Fittler started to see the big props and the big forwards of the Warriors starting to struggle. Big blokes like Mark Tukey and Guttenbeil and those sorts of blokes starting to struggle. And he noticed, I think it was Big Mark Tukey that was really struggling on that left side. And that's when he decided to make the switch up and come to the other side of the ruck. And it was just smart heads-up play. It was just a play from a senior player that saw what was on offer and was still good enough to be able to take it and make something of it.
So then after that, obviously the famous moment where big Richard the Gorilla Villasani hits Fittler with everything. So it's the last tackle. It's the 60th minute. And still at this point, the Roosters are up 12-8. Fittler goes for a kick. Unfortunately for Fittler, I mean, it's a little bit of his own doing because he feigns the kick and then, I don't know, he must see something there, but he cops it from Warangi Korpu. He's on the ground. I guess he's already out at that point. And then Villasani comes across. I think at that point, most people thought that's fair play. If you look at it now, that's probably 4 weeks on the sidelines for Villasani. But what we just went back to before about the Roosters going up when something happens. And when something just happened then, Brad Fittler knocked out twice in a matter of moments. He gets to his feet. He acts like nothing's wrong. But the grand final's gone from there for the Warriors, isn't it?
Well, it is, and as you say, in this day and age, leading with your head like that, like Villasani's tackle in those days was fine. He was attempting to make a tackle. Now, sure, he led with his head and he made contact with Fittler's head, but in 2002, that was quite okay on the proviso that you were attempting to make a tackle, which Villasani was. Now, fast forward to 2020, both of those guys would be sitting on the sideline for 15 minutes undergoing a HIA, and it'd be a totally different game of football. But as it was, the famous scenes of Fittler getting his head taped up and wrapped up because Villasani had split him open. And as you say, all the players wanted to send Fittler out on a high. They wanted Brad to be able to win that grand final. He was brought to the club to win a grand final. He was close in 2000. Was this going to be his last ever throw of the dice at a grand final? He was, it was looking like he was going to retire.
At the time they thought he might have been done.
Correct. There was rumours he might have gone around for one more. Nobody was really sure. They were thinking that, if the Roosters happened to win this game, then he probably would go out a winner. And so all of a sudden, Villasani collects him, and you could physically see the change. You could see the change in the Roosters players. They weren't going to cop that. And as you say, you could see them all bristling up. Morley, Peter Cusack, Jason Kalis, the likes of those guys all just sort of lifted and said, we're not going to cop that. If that's the way you want to treat, basically our leader, then cop some of this. And as you say, from there on in, it was one-way traffic, and the Warriors really copped a belting from that moment onwards.
Well, the rest is history. I don't think we have to go into it, but I'll ask you one more question before.
Well, you can.
No, that's all right. Trust me, I've almost nodded off a couple of times, Cam.
I guess I've watched it, at least 25, 30 times. Reliving it once more isn't going to hurt.
No, don't worry. I've seen it plenty too, mate. Don't worry. My old man's a Roosters fan, which I'm sure I've told you, and I've had to sit through it when our cousin Paul from California came over, who famously as an amateur wrestled Kurt Angle, and Paul had never seen an NRL game before. And I had to sit there for 5 hours as Dad paused the VHS and said, "Now this is what." And I went, "Mate, I can't watch this anymore." But I'll ask you one final question, Cam. With your Roosters fan cap on, do you see? Obviously, 2002 on its own is a magical moment for the Roosters and a long time coming. Do you throw that into the next 2 years and say, you know what, I'm a little bit upset we didn't do better in the next couple of years?
Oh, absolutely. They should have won 2003 by the length of the straight. That was a real disheartening, disappointing season for Roosters fans. They were the best team by that far. And if you have a look through the 2003 season, the thing that brought the Roosters undone on several occasions was wet weather. They always wanted to play dry weather football regardless of the conditions, and they ran into a wet grand final night in 2003 and a Panthers team that were prepared to get down and get dirty in order to do what it took to win a comp. And unfortunately, the Roosters weren't ready for them. They tried to play dry weather football in a grand final situation that needed them to get down and get gritty and dirty, and they weren't up for it. The Panthers were better for them on the night. And then you go forward to 2004, and you had basically an unchanged Canterbury team from 2002. And basically it came down to one tackle in the dying moments, and Mr. Ryan making the legs tackle that basically saved Canterbury and won them a comp.
Well, I still personally, I know it's only one grand final in what a 4 or 5 year period. I still call that a dynasty because they changed the game forever. And they were so far ahead of everyone else in every aspect of the game, on and off the field. I personally think you should have won maybe one more, but I still look at what the Roosters did in that era and say they changed the game. So you should be proud of what they did, mate.
Oh, absolutely. Very proud of them. And breaking that drought set them up and bringing Gould across, as we touched on it very early on, and then bringing Fittler across has set them up for perpetual success. And I think that's one of the reasons that they are one of the more hated clubs in the NRL at the moment, is because they've had such long-term success. They've had a couple of downs. There's no doubt about that, but most teams will have to go through rebuilding at some stage. But their player retention, the way that they turn the players over and that they decide what the players are worth, and if the players want more than that, well, go and test yourself on a market. They let a superstar like Latrell Mitchell go because they didn't believe he was worth the money that he wanted, and look, they're going all right without him. I mean, they might not win the comp, okay, big deal, but they've won 2 in a row. They decided to bring up Cooper Cronk because they thought that would suit the way that they wanted to play. They had to release some players to make room. They did that, and lo and behold, they win 2 in a row.
Cam Hickson, thank you, buddy.
Curtis, always a pleasure.